The rain hammered against the cracked window of Mike Cross's small apartment as he sat in the dark, staring at the evidence bag on his kitchen table. Inside it, a 9mm handgun he had never seen before in his life. The police report claimed they found it in his truck during a routine traffic stop. But Mike knew better. He knew exactly what this was. A setup. After 23 years on the force, he recognized a frame job when he saw one. Shadow, his 10-year-old German shepherd, sat beside him with those piercing amber eyes locked on his face, sensing the storm brewing inside his former handler. The dog's gray and white coat seemed to glow in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Mike reached down and ran his hand over the scar on Shadow's muzzle, a reminder of the dog's final tour with the K9 unit before they both retired. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. 3 days earlier, Mike had done something that powerful people wanted him to regret. He had testified against 2 officers from his old precinct, men he once called brothers. Detective Ray Hollins and Sergeant Tom Vickers had been under investigation for evidence tampering, but the department tried to bury it. Mike couldn't stay silent. Not after what he had seen. Not after 23 years of trying to do things the right way. Now they wanted to destroy him. The charge was illegal possession of a firearm by a person under investigation. The irony wasn't lost on Mike. He had turned in his service weapon when he retired, kept everything by the book. But facts didn't matter when the people writing the reports wanted you gone. His lawyer, a public defender who looked barely old enough to vote, had told him the evidence was solid. Security footage showed Mike's truck at the location. His fingerprints were on the door handle. Everything pointed to him. Everything except the truth. Mike stood and walked to the window, Shadow following close behind. Outside, an unmarked car sat across the street. Same car that had been there for 2 days. They were watching him, making sure he understood the message. Stay quiet, or things get worse. He looked down at Shadow, and the dog's ears perked forward in that alert, intelligent way that had saved Mike's life more than once during their years together on patrol. Shadow had been trained to detect explosives, track suspects through impossible terrain, and read situations before humans even understood what was happening. If anyone could help him find the truth, it was this dog. Mike grabbed his dark jacket and headed for the door. Shadow was already there, waiting with that professional K9 bearing that never fully left him, even in retirement. Mike knelt down and looked into those golden eyes and said, "We're going to find out who really owns that gun, boy. And we're going to make them pay for thinking they could do this to us." The rain had stopped by the time they reached Mike's old pickup truck. He did a full sweep underneath, checking for tracking devices. Found 2. He left them in place. If they were watching, he would give them something to see. He drove south toward the industrial district where the alleged traffic stop had occurred. According to the police report, Officer Derek Chen had pulled him over for a broken taillight. Mike's taillight wasn't broken. He had checked. Chen was young, only 3 years on the force, but he had already developed a reputation. He did what he was told, no questions asked. Perfect tool for someone like Hollins or Vickers. Mike parked 3 blocks away from the location and approached on foot with Shadow at his side. The area was mostly abandoned warehouses and empty lots. No cameras. No witnesses. Exactly the kind of place you would choose if you wanted to plant evidence without anyone seeing. Shadow's nose went to work immediately, sniffing the ground in widening circles. Mike watched the dog move with practiced efficiency, those years of training still sharp despite his age. The scar on Shadow's left shoulder, barely visible under his fur, was from their last call together. A domestic violence suspect had come at Mike with a knife, and Shadow had taken the blade meant for his handler. 3 months later, they both retired. Mike had saved the dog's life twice before. Shadow had returned the favor 4 times. They were even, but they both kept counting. Shadow stopped suddenly near a storm drain at the edge of the lot. His ears shot forward, body going rigid in that unmistakable, alert posture. Mike moved closer and knelt beside the dog. Shadow's nose pointed directly into the drain, his whole body vibrating with focus. Mike pulled out his flashlight and shined it into the darkness. At first, he saw nothing but trash and stagnant water. Then the light caught something metallic, about 6 feet down. He reached in, stretching as far as he could, fingers brushing against something smooth and cold. He pulled out a small waterproof case, the kind you would use for electronics or documents. Shadow sat back, watching Mike with those intelligent eyes, waiting for the next command. Mike opened the case. Inside, he found a burner phone and a small notebook. His hands started shaking as he flipped through the pages. It was a ledger. Dates, amounts, initials. And right there on the 3rd page, his own initials next to the date of his supposed traffic stop. But it wasn't his handwriting. Someone had documented the frame job like it was just another transaction. The burner phone had only one number in its call history, repeated over and over. Mike didn't recognize it, but he memorized it anyway. This was evidence. Real evidence. The kind that could blow the whole thing wide open if he could just figure out whose handwriting filled that notebook. Shadow suddenly tensed, a low growl rumbling from his chest. Mike looked up and saw headlights turning into the lot. The unmarked car from outside his apartment. They had followed him, after all. Mike slipped the case into his jacket and moved into the shadows of the nearest warehouse with Shadow pressed against his leg. The car stopped exactly where Mike's truck had allegedly been pulled over. 2 figures got out. Even from this distance, Mike recognized the walk. Hollins and Vickers. They weren't even trying to hide anymore. Mike pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the warehouse and placed a hand on Shadow's back, feeling the tension in the dog's muscles. The German Shepherd's training held firm, not a sound, just coiled readiness. Hollins and Vickers walked to the spot where Shadow had found the drain, their voices carrying across the empty lot. "We should have checked this earlier," Hollins said, his voice tight with anger. "If that washed-up has-been finds anything, we're done." Vickers pulled out a flashlight and shined it into the storm drain. "It's gone. The case is gone." Mike felt a grim satisfaction settle over him. They had come back for their evidence, but they were too late. Shadow had beaten them to it. Hollins kicked at the drain cover, the metallic clang echoing through the night. "Cross is smarter than we thought. We need to move up the timeline. The preliminary hearing is in 4 days. We make sure he's discredited before then." "How?" Vickers asked. "We've already planted the gun. What else can we do?" Hollins turned, and even from the shadows, Mike could see the cold calculation on his face. "We go after his credibility. Find every mistake he ever made, every bad call, every time he bent the rules. Make him look like a dirty cop who finally got caught. Nobody will believe anything he says after that." Mike's jaw clenched. He had spent 23 years building a reputation, trying to be one of the good ones in a system that rewarded looking the other way. And now these two were going to burn it all down to save themselves. Shadow's body shifted slightly, his nose pointing toward a secondary exit from the lot. The dog had spotted something Mike had missed. A third person standing near a dark sedan, about 40 yards away, watching Hollins and Vickers. The figure was too far away to identify, but their posture suggested authority. Someone higher up the chain. Hollins and Vickers walked back to their car, still talking in low, urgent tones. The engine started, and they drove off toward the north exit. The third person waited exactly 30 seconds before getting into the sedan and following. Mike waited another 5 minutes before moving, letting Shadow lead him through a maze of alleys back toward his truck. His mind raced through the implications. This wasn't just about two dirty cops covering their tracks. Someone else was involved. Someone with enough juice to coordinate this kind of operation. Back at the truck, Mike sat in the driver's seat and examined the notebook more carefully under the dome light. The entries went back 6 months, dozens of transactions marked with initials and dollar amounts. Some he recognized. Evidence room discrepancies he had noticed but couldn't prove. Arrest reports that didn't match the facts. But most of the entries were coded in a way he didn't understand. Shadow sat in the passenger seat, alert and watching the street. Mike pulled out his personal phone, the one he knew was probably compromised, and took photos of every page in the notebook. Then he uploaded them to a cloud server under an anonymous account. Insurance. If something happened to him, the evidence would still exist. He drove to the one place he thought might still be safe. A small diner on the east side of town where he used to meet his old partner, Jack Morrison. Jack had retired 5 years earlier and moved to Florida, but his daughter still lived in town. Sarah Morrison had followed her father into law enforcement, but quit after 2 years, disgusted by what she had seen. Now she worked as a private investigator, taking cases the police wouldn't touch. The diner was nearly empty when Mike walked in with Shadow. A few late-night truckers nursed coffee in the corner booths, barely looking up. Sarah sat at a table near the back, her dark hair pulled into a ponytail, her sharp eyes assessing him as he approached. "You look like hell, Mike." He slid into the seat across from her, Shadow settling under the table. "I need your help." She leaned back and crossed her arms. "I heard about the charges. Gun possession. Pretty sloppy for someone like you." "It's a frame, Sarah. Hollins and Vickers are trying to bury me before I can testify against them." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "What do you have?" He slid the notebook across the table. "Shadow found this tonight. It's a ledger. Documents every dirty deal they've made for the last 6 months. My frame job is right there on page 3. Sarah opened the notebook and scanned the pages, her jaw tightening with each entry. "This is bigger than evidence tampering, Mike. These amounts suggest serious money changing hands. Drug cases, probably. Maybe even property room theft." "I know," Mike said. "And I saw them tonight. They came back looking for this. Someone else was watching them. Someone higher up." Sarah closed the notebook and met his eyes. "If you're right about this, you're not just fighting 2 dirty cops. You're fighting the people who protect them. And those people have resources you don't. That's why I need you," Mike said. "You're outside the system. You can move in ways I can't." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you need?" "The phone in that case has one number in its history. I need to know who it belongs to. And I need to know whose handwriting is in that notebook." She took the burner phone and examined it. "I have a contact who can trace this. As for the handwriting, that's going to be harder." "Any suspects?" Mike thought about the third person in the lot, the one watching from the shadows. Could be anyone. Captain, lieutenant, maybe even higher. Sarah slid the notebook into her bag. "I'll start digging. But Mike, you need to be careful. If they're willing to frame you, they're willing to do worse." He nodded and stood to leave. Shadow emerged from under the table, instantly alert. Mike paused and looked back at Sarah. "One more thing. The preliminary hearing is in 4 days. Whatever you find, I need it before then." She gave him a tight smile. "Then, I better get started." Mike left the diner with Shadow and drove back toward his apartment, taking a circuitous route to make sure he wasn't followed. His mind kept circling back to the same question. Who was the third person in the lot? Who had enough authority to coordinate a frame job and keep it quiet? Back at his apartment, He found the door slightly ajar. Shadow's hackles rose immediately, a low growl warning him of danger. Mike drew the small backup pistol he kept in an ankle holster, his department-issued weapon long since turned in, but not his personal firearms. He pushed the door open slowly. The apartment had been tossed. Every drawer pulled out, every cabinet opened, couch cushions thrown across the room. They had been looking for something. Probably the notebook. Mike moved through each room with Shadow clearing corners, the way they had done 1,000 times before. The apartment was empty now, but someone had been here recently. He could smell cigarette smoke, the cheap kind that Vickers always smoked. On his kitchen table, they had left a message. A single photo of Mike and Shadow from 5 years ago, both of them in uniform. Someone had drawn a red X over Shadow's face. Mike stared at the photo with the red X over Shadow's face, his hands curling into fists. They were escalating. The message was clear. If Mike kept pushing, they wouldn't just come after him. They would go after the only thing he had left that mattered. Shadow stood beside him, oblivious to the threat marked on his image, his amber eyes scanning the destroyed apartment for additional dangers. Mike's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Back off or the dog pays first. Mike's vision blurred with rage, but he forced himself to breathe, to think like the detective he used to be, instead of the angry man they were trying to make him. Threatening Shadow was a mistake. It told him they were desperate. People who were winning didn't make threats. They just acted. He took a photo of the message and forwarded it to Sarah, then blocked the number. His phone rang immediately. Sarah's voice was tight. "They're playing dirty." "Yeah," Mike said. "But they just showed their hand. People who threaten dogs are usually the same people who underestimate them." "What did you find?" Sarah's tone shifted to business. "The phone number traces back to a prepaid account, purchased with cash 3 weeks ago at a convenience store in South Baltimore. No cameras in that particular store. Dead end, designed to look like an accident. Convenient. Too convenient. What about the handwriting?" "Still working on that. I'm going to need samples from everyone in your old chain of command. Can you get me access to old case files? Internal reports." Mike thought for a moment. "I know someone in records. Retired clerk named Patricia Mendez. She owes me a favor. I'll reach out." "Make it fast," Sarah said. "I'm hearing rumors that the department is preparing to escalate your charges. They're talking about adding witness tampering to the gun possession." Mike's stomach dropped. "Based on what?" "Based on whatever they decide to manufacture next. You need to assume every move you make is being watched and documented. Find a way to control the narrative before they write it for you." After hanging up, Mike looked around his destroyed apartment. They had been thorough, but not thorough enough. He walked to his bedroom closet and moved aside a loose floorboard. Underneath, in a fireproof box, he kept copies of everything. Old case files he had never turned in. Notes on investigations that got shut down too quickly. Photos of crime scenes that didn't match official reports. Insurance he had been collecting for years, never quite sure why. Now he knew. Mike pulled out a file marked Hollins Vickers and spread the contents across his bed. Shadow jumped up beside him, something Mike normally didn't allow, but tonight the rules didn't matter. The dog's presence was grounding, a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. The file contained 3 years of observations. Small things at first. Evidence that went missing. Suspects who walked despite solid cases. Witnesses who suddenly changed their stories. Mike had documented everything, but he had never had enough proof to act. Now, looking at it with fresh eyes, he saw the pattern. It wasn't just corruption. It was systematic. Organized. Someone had been running a protection racket inside the department, and Hollins and Vickers were just the visible operators. His phone buzzed again. This time, Patricia Mendez. "Mike, I heard about your situation. I'm sorry." "Thanks, Patricia. I need a favor." "Anything." "I need access to personnel files. Specifically, handwriting samples from internal reports. Captains and above." There was a long pause. "That's a big ask, Mike. Those files are locked down tight." "I know. But I wouldn't ask if I wasn't desperate. They're trying to bury me, Patricia. And I think the corruption goes higher than anyone realizes." Another pause, then a sigh. "I can get you digital copies. It'll take me until tomorrow afternoon." "Send them to this email address," Mike said, giving her the anonymous account he had set up. "And Patricia, be careful. If they find out you're helping me, they'll come after you too. I've been in records for 32 years, she said. "I've seen things that would turn your stomach. Maybe it's time someone finally did something about it." After ending the call, Mike spent the next hour documenting the destruction of his apartment with photos and video. Evidence of breaking and entering. Evidence of witness intimidation. He uploaded everything to the cloud, building a case against his accusers even as they built one against him. Shadow suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked forward toward the window. A moment later, Mike heard it too. Footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. Slow, deliberate. Someone trying to be quiet. He grabbed his backup pistol and moved to the door, Shadow at his side in full working mode. Through the peephole, he saw a figure in a dark hoodie standing outside his door. Not cops. Cops would have knocked or kicked the door in. This was something else. The figure slid an envelope under his door and walked away quickly. Mike waited 30 seconds before opening the door and retrieving the envelope. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "You're looking in the wrong place. Hollins and Vickers are just foot soldiers. The real power is in the DA's office. Check the Jenkins case from 2 years ago. Someone knows what you're trying to do and wants to help. But who? And why?" Mike thought back to the Jenkins case. Terrell Jenkins, a mid-level drug dealer who had been arrested with $50,000 in cash and 2 kilos of cocaine. Open and shut case. Except Jenkins walked on a technicality. Evidence mishandling. The case had been prosecuted by Assistant District Attorney Catherine Walsh, a rising star in the office known for her conviction rate. Mike had always thought the evidence dismissal was suspicious, but he had been overruled when he tried to investigate further. Now someone was telling him to look again. He pulled up the case file on his laptop, scanning through the reports and court documents. Everything looked standard until he reached the evidence log. The cocaine had been signed out of the property room by Officer Ray Hollins 3 days before the case was dismissed. Signed back in 2 days later. But the weight was off by exactly 2 grams. Someone had taken a sample. Mike's mind raced. If Hollins had tampered with the evidence, and the DA's office had known about it, that meant Walsh was involved. But why would an Ada risk her career to help a drug dealer walk? Unless the drug dealer was working for her. Or she was working for him. Shadow's head snapped toward the window again, and this time Mike heard it clearly. A car engine starting. He moved to the window in time to see a dark sedan pulling away from the curb. Same model as the one he had seen watching Hollins and Vickers earlier. Someone was coordinating all of this. Someone with access to police resources and prosecutorial power. Someone who could make evidence disappear and witnesses change their stories. Catherine Walsh fit that profile. But she was also smart enough not to leave an obvious trail. If Mike was going to prove she was involved, he needed more than a suspicious evidence log and an anonymous tip. Mike spent the rest of the night digging through digital archives, following the thread the anonymous tip had given him. Shadow dozed on the bed nearby, but his ears remained partially alert, twitching at every sound in the building. Mike's eyes burned from staring at the screen, but he pushed through the fatigue. The Jenkins case was just the beginning. He found 3 more cases over the past 2 years where significant evidence had gone missing or been compromised, all involving drug seizures, all prosecuted by Catherine Walsh, and all resulting in dismissals or reduced charges despite solid police work. The pattern was undeniable. Someone was using the Dawes office to protect certain dealers while prosecuting others. Classic protection racket. But Walsh wasn't doing this alone. She had help from inside the department. Mike cross-referenced the evidence logs and found Hollins's signature on 2 of the cases, Vickers on another. They were the inside men, making sure the right evidence disappeared at the right time. At 6 in the morning, Sarah called. "I've got something." Her voice had an edge to it. The handwriting in that notebook matches 3 different people. 2 of them you already know, Hollins and Vickers. The third is someone named Gerald Marks. Does that name mean anything to you? Mike's blood ran cold. Yeah. He's a lieutenant in internal affairs. Exactly, Sarah said. Which means your frame job had oversight from the very department that's supposed to investigate police corruption. This goes deeper than we thought, Mike. They've got someone in IA protecting them, and probably someone in the DA's office smoothing things over when cases get messy. I've already found that part, Mike said. Catherine Walsh, the prosecutor. Sarah sounded surprised. She's got a reputation for being straight arrow. Clean conviction record, no complaints. That's what makes her perfect, Mike said. Nobody would suspect her. I've found at least 4 cases where she deliberately tanked drug prosecutions after evidence was tampered with by Hollins or Vickers. She's the bridge between the police corruption and the legal system. Sarah was quiet for a moment. If you're right, then they've built a system where they can steal from dealers, protect their own suppliers, and use the legal system to eliminate competition. That's sophisticated. That's organized crime with badges. Mike rubbed his tired eyes. I need to talk to someone who can't be bought. Someone outside the system who still has credibility. Who are you thinking? Judge Robert Hastings. He's retired now, but he presided over 2 of these cases. If anyone noticed something was wrong, it would be him. Good luck getting him to talk to you, Sarah said. Retired judges don't usually involve themselves in ongoing investigations, especially ones that could blow back on them. I have to try, Mike said. The preliminary hearing is in 3 days. If I can't present evidence of a larger conspiracy, I'm going to trial on a gun charge I didn't commit. And once I'm convicted, everything I say about Walsh and the others becomes the ravings of a dirty cop trying to save himself. I'll keep digging on my end, Sarah said. Watch your back, Mike. These people have already shown they're willing to threaten Shadow. That means nothing is off limits. After the call ended, Mike showered and changed into clean clothes. Shadow watched him with those intelligent eyes, understanding on some level that today was important. They left the apartment together, Mike checking for surveillance before heading to his truck. The tracking devices were still in place. Good. Let them follow. Let them think they knew what he was doing. Judge Hastings lived in a quiet neighborhood on the north side of town, a modest house with a well-maintained garden and an American flag hanging by the front door. Mike parked down the street and approached on foot with Shadow at his side. He knocked 3 times before the door opened. Hastings was in his 70s now, his hair completely white but his eyes still sharp and assessing. He looked at Mike, then at Shadow, then back at Mike. You're cross. The cop who's about to go down for gun possession. Yes, sir. Mike kept his voice respectful. I need to talk to you about something that can't wait. Hastings frowned. I'm retired, Cross. I don't involve myself in active cases anymore. This isn't about my case, sir. It's about yours. 4 cases you presided over in the last 2 years. Drug prosecutions that fell apart due to evidence problems. I think someone was using your courtroom to run a protection racket. The judge's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. Yes, sir. And I have evidence to back it up. Hastings studied him for a long moment, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. That's all you get. Mike followed him into a study lined with law books and framed photographs from Hastings's 4 decades on the bench. Shadow sat politely by the door, his professional bearing apparently making a good impression. Mike laid out everything he had found. The notebook, the evidence logs, the pattern of cases involving Walsh, Hollins, and Vickers. He showed Hastings the ledger entries and the corresponding case numbers. The judge listened without interrupting, his face growing more grave with each revelation. When Mike finished, Hastings sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. I knew something was wrong, he finally said. Those cases bothered me. Good police work, solid evidence. Then everything falls apart on technicalities. But I'm a judge, Cross. I can only rule on what's presented to me. If the prosecution can't maintain chain of custody, I have no choice but to dismiss. I understand, sir. I'm not questioning your rulings. I'm asking if you noticed anything else. Anything that might help prove this conspiracy. Hastings stood and walked to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a folder and handed it to Mike. 6 months ago, I started keeping my own notes. Nothing official. Just observations. Patterns I was seeing in Walsh's cases. I even reached out to the chief prosecutor, but he told me I was reading too much into coincidence. Mike opened the folder and found detailed notes on 8 cases, 4 more than Mike had identified. Hastings had documented every irregularity, every suspicious timing, every convenient evidence failure. This is incredible, sir. This corroborates everything I found. Hastings met his eyes. I'm giving this to you because I believe you're telling the truth. But you need to understand something, Cross. If Walsh is involved, and if she has protection from internal affairs, then this goes to the top. Someone high up is allowing this to happen. Maybe even benefiting from it. I know, Mike said. That's why I need your help. My preliminary hearing is in 3 days. If I can present this evidence to the right people, I might be able to stop them before they bury me completely. The judge shook his head slowly. The right people are the problem, Cross. Everyone you would normally report this to is potentially compromised. District attorney, police chief, maybe even the mayor's office if the money is big enough. So what do I do? Hastings thought for a moment. There's a federal prosecutor in Baltimore, Christina Torres. She's been trying to build a corruption case against city officials for 2 years, but she can't get anyone to talk. If you walk in there with this evidence, she'll listen. And more importantly, she has the authority to act. Mike felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. But I need more than just documents and ledgers. I need someone on the inside to testify. Someone who was part of it and wants out. Mike left Judge Hastings's house with a new sense of purpose and a folder full of corroborating evidence. Shadow trotted beside him, alert and watchful. The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet residential street, but Mike couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Back in his truck, he sat for a moment considering his next move. He needed someone from inside the conspiracy to flip. Someone with enough knowledge to connect all the pieces, but vulnerable enough to cut a deal. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Found something interesting. Officer Derek Chen, the one who supposedly pulled you over. He's been calling a crisis hotline 3 times in the past week. Sounds like someone with a guilty conscience. Mike's mind immediately went to Chen, the young officer who had pulled him over, the one who had found the planted gun. Chen was new enough to the force that he might not be fully committed to the corruption, new enough to still have a conscience. "Where does Chen live?" Mike texted back. Sarah sent an address. "Apartment complex in East Baltimore." "But Mike, be careful. If you approach him directly, you could be accused of witness tampering. That's probably what they're hoping for." "I'll be careful," Mike replied. He drove to Chen's address, a run-down apartment building in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Mike parked across the street and watched the entrance for an hour. Shadow rested his head on Mike's lap, content to wait. Patience was something they had both learned over years of stakeouts. At 9:30, Chen emerged from the building. He looked terrible. Unshaven, clothes wrinkled, eyes hollow. He walked with his head down, hands shoved in his pockets. This was not the cocky young officer Mike had seen around the precinct. This was someone being eaten alive by guilt. Mike followed at a distance as Chen walked to a small park 2 blocks away. Chen sat on a bench alone, staring at nothing. Mike approached slowly with Shadow at his side. The German Shepherd's presence often put people at ease, made them less defensive. Chen looked up as Mike approached, and his face went pale. "Officer Cross, I didn't expect to see you." Mike sat on the other end of the bench, leaving space between them. Shadow settled at his feet. "I think we both know why I'm here, Derek." Chen's hand started shaking. He clasped them together to hide it. "I don't know what you're talking about. The gun you found in my truck. The one that was planted there. The one you knew about before you pulled me over." Chen's face crumpled. He looked like he might cry. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. They told me it was just going to be a routine stop. That I was helping with an investigation. I didn't know they were framing you until after." "Who told you that?" Mike asked gently. Chen shook his head. "I can't. If I say anything, they'll destroy me. They'll say I was part of it from the beginning. They've already threatened my family." Mike leaned forward. "Derek, I know you're scared. But right now, you have a choice. You can keep protecting people who are using you, or you can do the right thing. Those people are going to throw you away the moment you're no longer useful. You know that." Chen wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "It was Lieutenant Marks. He came to me 3 weeks ago. Said there was an officer under investigation for illegal weapons dealing. Said I was being given a chance to help with a major case. He told me exactly when and where to pull you over. Said the gun would be there. I believed him. I thought I was doing good police work." Mike's jaw tightened. Gerald Marks, the EA lieutenant whose handwriting was in the notebook. The connections were becoming clearer. "What happened after you found the gun?" Chen's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Marks took my report and told me to keep quiet about the details. Said it was part of an ongoing investigation. But then I heard the rumors. People were saying you were being framed because you testified against Hollins and Vickers. That's when I knew I had been used." Mike pulled out his phone and opened the voice recorder. "Derek, I need you to tell me everything. Everything Marks said, everything he told you to do. If you testify to this, I can protect you. But you have to be willing to tell the truth." Chen looked at the phone, then at Mike, then at Shadow. The dog gazed back with those calm amber eyes, non-judgmental and patient. There was something about Shadow's steady presence that seemed to give Chen courage. "If I do this, they'll come after me. They'll say I'm lying to save myself." Mike shook his head. "I have evidence that corroborates your story. A notebook documenting the frame job. Testimony from a federal judge about a pattern of corruption. You won't be alone in this, Derek. But I need you to start talking now. Chen took a deep breath and began to speak. He described everything. The meeting with Marks 3 weeks before the traffic stop. The specific instructions on where to pull Mike over. The planted evidence in the truck bed, placed there before Chen even activated his lights. Marks had assured him the gun would be found during a routine search, making it look legitimate. After the stop, Marks had taken Chen's initial report and rewritten parts of it, making it seem like Mike had been more aggressive, more suspicious. Chen had signed the revised report without reading it carefully, trusting his superior officer. Now that report was the foundation of the case against Mike. I've been trying to figure out how to fix this, Chen said, his voice breaking. I've called that crisis line 4 times. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I became a cop to help people, and instead, I helped destroy a good man's life. You can still fix it, Mike said. Come with me to the federal prosecutor's office. Tell them everything you just told me. They'll offer you protection and immunity if you cooperate. Chen hesitated. What about my family? Mark said if I talked, they would make sure my wife lost her job. My kids would be taken away. Mike understood the fear. These people had perfected the art of controlling others through threats. But he also knew that fear was their only real weapon. Once someone broke free and spoke the truth, the whole structure started to collapse. The federal prosecutor can protect your family, Mike said. They have resources that local police don't. Safe houses, job security guarantees, legal protection. But you have to take the first step. You have to decide that doing the right thing is worth the risk. Shadow shifted position, drawing Chen's attention. The officer looked at the dog for a long moment. I heard about you and Shadow. How you two were legends in the K9 unit. How you always had each other's backs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. I want that kind of partnership. That kind of integrity. I don't want to be the cop who sold his soul because he was too scared to stand up. Then don't be, Mike said. Come with me right now. We'll drive to Baltimore together. You'll tell your story to someone who can actually do something about it. 2 hours later, Mike and Derek Chen sat in a federal building in Baltimore, across from Assistant United States Attorney Christina Torres. Shadow lay under the table, his presence somehow making the sterile conference room feel less intimidating. Torres was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and intense, with the bearing of someone who had spent years fighting battles against corrupt systems. She had listened to Chen's entire statement without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral. Now she leaned back in her chair and studied both men. Officer Chen, I appreciate you coming forward. But you understand that your testimony alone isn't enough. You were following orders from a superior officer. Any decent defense attorney will paint you as a dupe, not a witness. I have more than just his testimony, Mike said. He pulled out the notebook, the evidence logs from Judge Hastings, and the documentation of the 4 compromised drug cases. Torres examined each piece of evidence carefully, her eyes narrowing as she read through the ledger entries. This notebook, where did you get it? My dog found it, Mike said. Shadow located a waterproof case near the scene where I was supposedly pulled over. The case contained this notebook and a burner phone. Torres looked at Shadow with new appreciation. A K9 officer. Trained in evidence detection. Yes, ma'am. 10 years on the force. Specialized in explosives and tracking, but he's found his share of hidden evidence over the years. Torres made a note. That actually helps us. If your dog located the evidence during a lawful search, it's admissible. And the fact that the notebook documents your own frame job gives you standing to possess it. She flipped through more pages. These entries correspond to case numbers. I can subpoena these files and compare the evidence logs. If everything matches up the way you're suggesting, we have a pattern of systematic corruption involving police officers, an internal affairs lieutenant, and an assistant district attorney. She looked up at Mike. You mentioned Catherine Walsh. You're saying an Ada is actively helping to undermine prosecutions. That's a significant accusation. I have evidence, Mike said. 4 cases where Walsh prosecuted drug dealers with solid evidence, only to have the cases dismissed after evidence tampering. In each case, the evidence was handled by either Hollins or Vickers. And in each case, the amount of drugs recovered was suspiciously lower than the initial seizure reports indicated. Torres was quiet for a moment, processing. You're describing a protection racket. They seize drugs from dealers, skim off the top for their own distribution network, then use Walsh to make sure the cases fall apart so the dealers they're protecting don't go to prison. That's exactly what I'm describing, Mike said. And I think it goes higher than Walsh. Someone in the department is coordinating this. Someone with enough authority to keep internal affairs from investigating. Torres closed the notebook. All right, here's what's going to happen. I'm opening a formal investigation into public corruption. Officer Chen, you're going to be my first cooperating witness. I'm granting you immunity in exchange for your full testimony. You'll be placed in protective custody until we can secure your family. Chen exhaled in relief. Thank you. Torres turned to Mike. As for you, Detective Cross, your situation is more complicated. You're currently under indictment. I can't make those charges go away without showing cause. But what I can do is file a motion with the court to delay your preliminary hearing while we investigate the circumstances of your arrest. That buys us time. How much time? Mike asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3, if the judge is sympathetic. After that, you either go to trial, or we have enough evidence to blow this case wide open and get your charges dismissed. Mike nodded. That's enough. What do you need from me? Torres pulled out a legal pad. I need you to walk me through every interaction you've had with Hollins, Vickers, Marks, and Walsh over the past 3 years. Every case where you noticed something suspicious. Every time evidence went missing or a witness changed their story. I need a timeline that shows this wasn't just a few isolated incidents, but a coordinated pattern. Mike spent the next 3 hours providing detailed statements. Shadow dozed under the table, occasionally lifting his head when Mike's voice grew strained. Chen corroborated parts of the timeline, adding details about other officers who had been recruited into the scheme. By the time they finished, Torres had filled 20 pages with notes. This is good, she said. This is really good. But we're still missing the connection to whoever is running this operation from the top. Marks is Ia, but he's not senior enough to coordinate something this elaborate. Walsh is an Ada, but she doesn't have the authority to influence police operations. Someone else is pulling the strings. Mike had been thinking about this throughout his statement. The only person with enough authority to coordinate both police and prosecutorial actions would be someone who had influence in both systems. Someone like Deputy Chief Ronald Garrett. Torres looked up sharply. Garrett. He's been with the department for 30 years. Decorated officer. Multiple commendations. Exactly, Mike said. Which makes him perfect for this role. Nobody would suspect him. He has access to everything. He can reassign officers, influence case assignments, coordinate with the DA's office on prosecution strategies. If you wanted to run a protection racket inside the police department, Garrett is exactly who you would need. Do you have any evidence linking him to this? Torres asked. Not yet, Mike admitted. But I have something almost as good. I have a theory about how to get it. Torres raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Mike leaned forward. Garrett doesn't know that Chen has flipped. He doesn't know about this federal investigation. As far as he's concerned, everything is still going according to plan. My preliminary hearing is in 3 days, and he expects me to either plead out or go to trial and lose. What if we use that? What if we let him think he's won? Torres considered this. You want to set a trap. Mike nodded. Chen reaches out to Marks. Says he's having second thoughts about his testimony. Says he's worried about perjury charges if the case goes sideways. Marks reports this to Garrett. Garrett gets nervous and arranges a meeting to make sure everyone is still on the same page. We wire Chen, and we get Garrett on tape confirming the conspiracy. Torres looked at Chen. Are you willing to do that? Chen's face was pale, but he nodded. If it means stopping these people, yes. I'll do it. Torres made more notes. All right. But we do this carefully. If Garrett suspects anything, he'll shut down the whole operation and destroy evidence. We get one shot at this. I'll coordinate with FBI surveillance teams. We'll have eyes and ears on the meeting, and we'll have tactical units nearby in case things go wrong. Mike felt a surge of hope. This could work. If they could get Garrett on tape admitting to the conspiracy, the entire network would collapse. Walsh, Hollins, Vickers, Marks, everyone involved would go down. Torres stood and extended her hand to Mike. Detective Cross, you were right to come to me. This is the kind of case that defines careers. Either we take down one of the most sophisticated corruption rings I've ever seen, or we all go down trying. Mike shook her hand firmly. Shadow rose from under the table, sensing the shift in energy. The German Shepherd's amber eyes looked from Mike to Torres to Chen, as if understanding that the pack had grown and the mission had become clearer. 2 days later, Derek Chen sat in a coffee shop in downtown Baltimore, wearing a wire thin enough to be undetectable under his shirt. Mike watched from a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away, listening through headphones as FBI agents monitored multiple camera feeds. Shadow sat beside him in the cramped space, calm and patient. Torres stood at the front of the van, coordinating with her team. Chen had reached out to Lieutenant Marks the previous evening, expressing concerns about his testimony in Mike's case. As predicted, Marks had panicked and arranged an emergency meeting. But instead of meeting with Chen alone, Marks had insisted that Deputy Chief Garrett attend. That was the confirmation they needed. Garrett was involved. Target approaching, one of the FBI agents announced, watching the camera feed. Male, 50s, gray hair. Matches Garrett's description. Mike leaned forward, watching the monitor. Garrett walked into the coffee shop in civilian clothes, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Chen at a corner table. His body language was relaxed, confident. This was a man who believed he was in complete control. The audio feed crackled as Garrett sat down. Chen, I heard you're having doubts about your testimony. Chen's voice was steady, despite what Mike knew must be overwhelming fear. I'm worried about the inconsistencies in my report, sir. If Cross's lawyer starts digging into the details, they're going to find problems. What kind of problems? Garrett asked. His tone was casual, but Mike detected an edge underneath. The timeline doesn't quite match. The way I described the traffic stop doesn't align with the traffic camera footage from 2 blocks away. If they pull that footage, they'll see that Cross's truck was never in the location I said it was. There was a pause. We've already taken care of the traffic cameras, Garrett said. The footage from that night has been archived. It won't be accessible to Cross's defense team. Chen pressed forward. But what if they get a court order? What if a judge demands the original footage? Garrett's voice hardened slightly. Chen, you need to understand something. This operation has been running for 3 years without a single problem. We've protected dozens of officers, secured millions in supplemental income, and eliminated threats to our network. One retired detective with a vendetta is not going to bring this down. I need to hear you say it, Chen said. I need to know that if this goes wrong, I'm protected. Garrett leaned closer. The audio picked up his lowered voice clearly. You're protected because you're part of the family now. Just like Hollins and Vickers. Just like the 15 other officers who are on our payroll. Just like Ada Walsh and Judge Morrison. Mike's eyes widened. Judge Morrison. Torres immediately pulled out her phone and started texting her team. Morrison was a sitting judge in the criminal court. If he was compromised, that meant the conspiracy had infected the judiciary as well. Chen continued. And what about Cross? What happens to him after the preliminary hearing? Garrett's tone became cold. Cross made his choice when he decided to testify against our people. He'll be convicted on the gun charge, spend 3 to 5 years in prison, and lose his pension. By the time he gets out, nobody will believe anything he says. His credibility will be destroyed. What about his dog? Chen asked. Mike's hands clenched into fists. The dog is not your concern, Garrett said. But if Cross continues to be a problem, we'll handle that too. You don't threaten a man's dog without consequences. Mike's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. Garrett was digging his own grave with every word. Chen shifted topics. What about the money? I was told I would receive my first payment after Cross's preliminary hearing. Garrett's tone softened. You'll get your cut. $5,000 for your cooperation in this case. After that, you'll be assigned to our distribution network in the Eastern District. We move product through evidence storage. You'll help facilitate the transfers and receive a percentage of each transaction. We're talking about an extra $50,000 a year, tax-free. Just for doing what you're told and keeping your mouth shut. That's drug trafficking, Chen said, his voice wavering slightly. That's life in prison if we get caught. We won't get caught, Garrett said firmly. We control internal affairs through Marks. We control prosecution through Walsh. We control the courts through Morrison. The system protects us because we are the system. The only way this falls apart is if someone from the inside talks. And we've made it very clear what happens to people who talk. In the surveillance van, Torres was already on the phone with a federal judge, arranging for immediate arrest warrants. Mike listened as Garrett continued to lay out the entire operation, apparently confident that Chen could be fully brought into the fold. Chen asked carefully constructed questions that prompted Garrett to provide more details. The number of officers involved. The amount of money changing hands. The specific cases where evidence had been compromised. Every word was recorded in crystal clarity. After 20 minutes, Torres gave the signal. FBI agents who had been staged around the coffee shop moved in simultaneously. Mike watched through the camera feed as 4 agents approached Garrett's table, badges displayed. Deputy Chief Ronald Garrett, you're under arrest for conspiracy, corruption, drug trafficking, and obstruction of justice. Garrett's face went white. He stood quickly, looking for an exit, but agents blocked every direction. Chen remained seated, pulling the wire from under his shirt. Garrett's expression transformed from shock to fury as he realized what had happened. You wore a wire, you little bastard. I'll destroy you for this. You're under arrest, one of the agents repeated, pulling Garrett's arms behind his back and cuffing him. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Mike felt a surge of satisfaction watching Garrett being led out of the coffee shop in handcuffs. But the operation wasn't over. Torres's team was simultaneously executing search warrants on Garrett's home and office, Marks's apartment, Hollins and Vickers's residences, and Catherine Walsh's office at the DA's. By evening, all 5 main conspirators were in federal custody. Mike sat in Torres's office with Shadow at his feet, watching news coverage of the arrests. The local stations were calling it the biggest corruption scandal in the city's history. 15 officers arrested, 1 assistant district attorney, 1 judge, and multiple civilian accomplices involved in a drug trafficking and protection racket that had operated for 3 years. Torres walked in with a satisfied expression. "We found everything. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Ledgers documenting every transaction. Text messages between Garrett and Walsh coordinating which cases to tank. We even found the original traffic camera footage that proves you were never at the location where Chen supposedly pulled you over." Mike felt the weight he had been carrying for weeks finally lift. "So the charges against me?" "Dismissed," Torres said. "I've already filed the motion. The prosecutor's office won't fight it. They're too busy trying to distance themselves from Walsh. You're a free man, Mike. And more than that, you're a hero. You exposed a conspiracy that could have continued for years." Mike shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a cop who couldn't stand by and watch the system get corrupted." Torres smiled. "That's exactly what makes you a hero." She handed him a folder. "There's something else. We found evidence that Garrett was planning to have you killed if the frame job didn't work. There were encrypted messages to a contract criminal discussing payment for permanent removal of the cross problem. Shadow would have been collateral damage." Mike's hands trembled with anger as he read the messages. They had been planning to kill him and Shadow both. Torres put a hand on his shoulder. "But they didn't. Because you fought back. Because you didn't give up. And because you had the best partner anyone could ask for." She nodded toward Shadow. "That dog saved your life in more ways than one." 1 week later, Mike stood outside the federal courthouse in Baltimore as reporters crowded around him with cameras and microphones. Shadow sat calmly at his side, unbothered by the chaos. Torres had just finished a press conference announcing the indictments against all 15 conspirators. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, recorded conversations, testimony from Derek Chen, and 3 other officers who had agreed to cooperate. The case was airtight. "Detective Cross," one reporter called out, "how does it feel to have your name cleared?" Mike chose his words carefully. "It feels like justice. But this isn't about me. This is about a system that allowed corruption to flourish for 3 years. This is about good officers who were pressured to compromise their integrity or face retaliation. This is about holding people accountable, no matter how powerful they are." Another reporter pushed forward. "What's next for you? Are you returning to the police force?" Mike glanced down at Shadow. "No. My time as a cop is done. I spent 23 years trying to work within a system that ultimately protected the wrong people. I testified against corruption and got framed for my trouble. That tells me everything I need to know about whether the system wants to reform itself." "So what will you do?" the reporter pressed. Mike had been thinking about this question for days. "I'm going to do what I should have done a long time ago. I'm going to help people who can't get justice through official channels. Private investigations. Looking into cases where the police won't or can't help. Making sure that victims have someone on their side who can't be bought or intimidated." He looked directly into the camera. "And I'm going to expose corruption wherever I find it. Because the only way to fix a broken system is to shine a light on it until the people responsible can't hide anymore." The press conference ended, and Mike walked back to his truck with Shadow. Sarah was waiting for him, leaning against the driver's side door. "Hell of a speech," she said. "You planning to back it up?" Mike smiled. "I was hoping you'd help me with that." Sarah pushed off the truck and crossed her arms. Private investigation firm. You and me. Mike nodded. You've got the skills and the connections. I've got the experience and the stubborn refusal to let things go. Shadow's got the nose for finding evidence nobody else can find. Sounds like a solid team. Sarah looked at Shadow, who gazed back with those intelligent amber eyes. What are we calling this firm? Mike thought for a moment. Cross Investigations. Simple. Direct. Tells people exactly what we do. Sarah grinned. All right, partner. When do we start? Mike pulled out his phone and showed her an email he had received that morning. A woman named Elena Rodriguez had reached out after seeing news coverage of Mike's case. Her brother had been killed in what police ruled a drug deal gone wrong, but Elena insisted he wasn't involved in drugs. The investigation had been closed after 2 weeks with no arrests. The lead detective on the case had been Ray Hollins. Sarah read the email and nodded slowly. You think Hollins killed her brother? I think Hollins was involved in something that got her brother killed. And I think the case was buried because it would have exposed the conspiracy. Elena deserves to know what really happened. They drove to Elena's address in East Baltimore. Elena answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a desperate expression. Detective Cross. Please, come in. Mike and Sarah entered with Shadow, who immediately picked up on the woman's distress and sat close to her, offering silent comfort. Elena reached down and stroked Shadow's head, her hands shaking. Thank you for coming. The police won't talk to me anymore. They say the case is closed, and I need to accept it. But I know my brother. Carlos wasn't a drug dealer. He was a mechanic. He had a daughter. He was trying to build a better life. Tell me what happened, Mike said gently. Elena led them to the kitchen table, where she had spread out newspaper clippings, police reports, and photographs. Carlos was found shot 3 times in an alley behind his shop 6 months ago. The police said it was a drug transaction. They found $20,000 in cash and 2 kilos of cocaine in his car. She looked up at Mike with fierce intensity. But that's impossible. Carlos didn't have $20,000. He was barely making rent on his shop. And he would never touch drugs. Our father died from an overdose when we were kids. Carlos hated everything about that world. Mike examined the police report. The lead investigator was Ray Hollins. The evidence had been logged by Tom Vickers. This fits the pattern, Sarah said quietly. They killed Carlos and made it look like a drug deal. Mike nodded grimly. I'm going to find out exactly what happened to Carlos. And I'm going to make sure they pay for it.